January 23rd, 2023 Board of Trustees meeting will come to order. Are we? Okay, thank you. Item 1B, adoption of agenda and approval of consent agenda items. For policy BE, are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, we will move on to adoption of the agenda and the approval of the consent agenda.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I move to lay to rest the reading of item, find it. The first reading of policy BC, item 9A.
All right.
I second it.
All right, there is a motion and a second to table agenda item 9A. We will cast our votes for that.
So the motion was to table.
Correct. The motion to table was made by Ms. Roberson and seconded by Dr. Temple. We may take a hand vote if that is easier. No, okay. Please cast your vote to table the first reading of policy BC and agenda item 9A.
I have a question. Is the vote going to come up on my screen? I am zooming.
Well, no, you should have to be in board docs.
If she's in board docs, it'll come up. Or she can. Ms. McKinney, Dr. Temple won't hear them, so you have to answer. the question on the mic.
It will come up if you are in board docs.
I'm on the Zoom link. So
Will you do a voice vote? You can see our monitor, I assume, Dr. Temple?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if you are comfortable with a voice vote to yay, nay, or abstain the motion to table.
Yay. Word docs.
So the motion fails to pass because there is not a majority vote. Thank you. Moving on, is there an motion to accept the agenda and to approve the consent agenda?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Kelly moves. Is there a second? Second. And Ms. Bailey seconds.
do we have comments?
Yeah.
You are supposed to allow comments after, because after it's been seconded, then discussion can happen.
Oh, I didn't think that applied to minutes. What is the discussion?
I don't know, Miss
Oh.
Miss Roberson had some.
Is it for minutes or the agenda?
We are on item 1B, the agenda and approval of consent agenda.
Yes, I do have a comment
Okay.
with the adoption of the agenda, Madam Chair. I just want to go on the record by saying that after looking at this agenda, it is very concerning to me that everything on this agenda has to do with policy and finances. And we are in the business of education, and I would like to see moving forward that we discuss student outcome as our priority. I hope that this is an exception and not the rule. Thank you.
Certainly. Are there,
And for clarification, I think one of the audit and finance reasons that a lot of it's on the agenda is because this January is one of those months in which the committee of the whole met before the audit and finance. So normally a lot of these issues would have been discussed at committee of the whole on the finance side.
any other discussion before we call for the vote? Yes.
How did that? You had to talk.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that part. Dr. Temple, do you vote to yay, nay, or abstain to the motion to adopt the agenda and approve the consent agenda?
Yay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. The motion carries.
Carried. It just went too quickly.
Oh, all right. On to item 1C, the approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for the committee of the whole and the board meeting of December the 12th, 2022, and January the 9th, 2023?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Roberson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We will cast our votes. Okay. Dr. Temple, I think did you cast your vote verbally?
No. Yes. My vote is yay.
Thank you. And the motion passes. We are on to item 1D. If you will stand and join me for a moment of silence as I read for our assembly this evening. Fellow board members and members of the audience, we would like to take a moment to remember several individuals of the Charleston County School District family who have recently passed away. Please join me as we remember Jennifer Smith, one of our teachers, Damon Richardson White, a student, Amani Neesmith, a student, and Mr. Arthur Ravenel Jr., a former trustee. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, we want to express our sincere condolences and deepest sympathy to these friends, families, and loved ones of so many. Thank you. And Mr. Grabowski, if you would lead us in the pledge.
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
I will now recognize Ms. Denny.
Good evening, Chair McKinney, Vice Chair Bailey, Board of Trustees, and Superintendent Kennedy. This evening, for special recognition, we would like to take a few moments to pay special recognition to you, our esteemed trustees, who have dedicated your time and talents in service to the citizens of Charleston County. In South Carolina, the month of January is designated School Board Recognition Month by decree of the governor. To mark this honor, I'm going to read the governor's proclamation in celebration of this occasion. Whereas education is the foundation upon which the economic, intellectual, and social capital of our state is built, and whereas school boards directly influence instruction in South Carolina's public schools, and whereas the decision of local school boards affect the present and future lives of children while setting the direction to prepare all students to be competitive in a local, state, national, and global 21st century knowledge economy, and whereas local school board members work with parents, businesses, education professionals, and other community members to represent their views and create the ideal educational vision for their public schools and students. And whereas School Board Recognition Month highlights the unique role school boards play in representing their constituents by promoting and advocating for quality public education. Now, therefore, I, Henry McMaster, Governor of the great state of South Carolina, do hereby proclaim January 2023 as School Board Recognition Month throughout the state and encourage all South Carolinians to recognize the contributions of local school boards to the academic success of public school students across the Palmetto State. Thank you, Ms. McKinney, Ms. Bailey, Mr. Grabowski, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Roberson, Dr. Temple, Ms. Waters, and Ms. Watley for your hard work and dedication to the students of Charleston County School District. We are very grateful for your service. Please join me in a round of applause for our trustees. This concludes the special recognitions for this evening.
So Ms. Denny, if I may, school board trustees. So as a lifelong public servant, I've always held those in public services with high esteem, none above the school board members. So thank y'all very much for the service that you provide for Charleston County School District and our students. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to item 3A to convene into executive session. Is there a motion to do so?
I make a motion to convene into executive session.
I second.
Ms. Watley moves to convene into executive session and Mr. Kelly seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Dr. Temple. The motion will be back hopefully shortly.
Okay, so. Where are board docs? There we go.
Is there a motion to reconvene?
I make a motion to reconvene.
Ms. Watley moves to reconvene. Is there a second?
I second.
Ms. Roberson seconds. Any discussion? Please cast your vote. Dr. Temple, are you with us?
She voted.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm here. I think I have it together.
And the motion passes, so we will continue. We will go on to item 6B, a personnel matter, breach of contract pursuant to South Carolina Code 30-470A1. Do I hear a motion? Oh, I'm so sorry, my papers covered it. I'll
I
get
make
it
a
up.
motion to forward it to the South Carolina State Board of Education.
Is there a second?
I second.
If there's a second, is there discussion? Coming from executive session, please cast your vote for item 6A. And the motion carries. Is there a motion for item 6B, personnel matter, breach of contract?
I move that we forward item 6B to the South Carolina State Department of Education for action.
Is there a second?
A second.
Ms. Bailey, Ms. Watley. No discussion as from executive session. Please cast your vote. And the motion passes. We go on to item 6C, foreign exchange student request. Is there a motion to consider this?
I make a motion to consider accepting this foreign exchange student at Wando High School.
Is there for the 2023-24 year?
Right.
Is there a second?
I'll
I
second.
second it.
No discussion from executive session. If you will cast your vote. Thank you, and the motion carries. I will turn item 7 over to Ms. Bailey for public comments.
Good evening. Good evening. We will now have time for public comment. And just for your reference, you have a 2-minute limit. Can I have Bonnie Cleveland come forward?
Board members, my name is Bonnie Cleveland. I'm a CCSD parent and an atheist. I'm one of those people who's hot all the time. But if I went to Saudi Arabia, I would cover all of the skin on my arms and my chest and my legs, and I would wear a headscarf. It's polite. It's what you do to be respectful when you're in somebody else's country and somebody else's house. We're taxpayers. This school district belongs to us. None of us should feel like we're outsiders here in our own schools, in our own board meetings. But when you pray before the meetings, it alienates many non-Christians and also a lot of Christians who understand that both religion and government are stronger when they're independent. We have freedom of religion under both our South Carolina Constitution and under the United States Constitution. But context is really important. You can have a beer, but not at work. You can have sex, but not in a public park. And you can pray publicly, but not when you are a leader of a diverse group of our government. I'm going to read to you, uncharacteristically for me, something from the Bible in Matthew chapter 5 and 6. When thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. But when thou prayest, enter into the closet. And when thou hast shut the door, pray to thy Father, which is in secret.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland.
Pray privately or quietly, but get on with the district business.
Thank you, ma'am. The next person up is Pascal Luz.
I am here today speaking as a concerned Charleston resident and grandmother of 3 school-age children whose parents are thinking of moving to Charleston. I've been informed that the Charleston County School Board has decided to open up meetings with a prayer referring a blanket God or Almighty, and not as first planned a Christian God. Therefore, in its attempt at inclusion, it will still be exclusionary, as imposing any prayer will exclude the ones amongst us who do not believe in any supernatural deity. A moment of silence before meetings, if it does not have a religious intent, would be the most inclusive option. Factually, a board-sponsored prayer would be in direct violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause and the given constitutional rights of students, parents, faculty, and staff. Religious views should not be preferred over non-religious views. It will be considered coercive, insensitive, intimidating, and unconstitutional. A recent case involving a school board insisting on prayer before meetings has been lost in a court of law. The losing school district had to pay over $200,000 in costs and attorney's fees. To avoid these issues, the Charleston County School Board must remove prayer from any meetings. Anyone is free to pray privately and to worship any deity on their own time. However, board members ought not to lend their power and prestige to religion or coerce attendees into participating in any religious exercise whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. The next up is Meredith McPhail.
Good evening. My name is Meredith McPhail. I'm a resident of Charleston County and a person of faith. I am also a staff attorney at the ACLU of South Carolina. Since the ACLU's founding over 100 years ago, it has been dedicated to protecting civil liberties, including the values of religious freedom and participatory democracy. Working at the ACLU is my dream job because I believe it is my moral and religious obligation to fight for liberty and equality, and that is what I am here to do today. The Charleston County School Board's proposal to open meetings with a prayer raises grave constitutional concerns. Under the First Amendment, government should not play a role in establishing religion. Although prayer is typically permissible to open meetings of legislative bodies, school context, religious activity is very different. As a result, any prayer at a school board meeting, particularly one that proselytizes a specific faith or disparages others, is more likely to violate the Constitution. Just as important, maintaining religious neutrality is simply the right thing to do. Opening meetings with prayer would hurt the board's constituents. It would exclude students, parents, teachers, and other community members who practice different faiths or no faith at all. By creating an exclusionary environment, the board would undermine participation by its constituents, which is a crucial component of its work. For all of these reasons, I urge the board to reject any policy allowing for government-sponsored prayer at meetings.
Thank you, Ms. McPhail. Next up is Jim Luz.
Good evening. I'm also a resident of Charleston County. And as not to be repetitive, I'll be brief. Charleston County, the CCSD, exists to support every child in achieving college, career, and citizenship readiness. That's your charter, as you well know. Religion is outside the board's purview for a reason. It is open to interpretation. It is by its very nature divisive, easily molded to fit one's particular view. And in summary, the antithesis of a democratic process founded on individual rights and embodied in constitutional law. I don't think that the board should try and impose prayer on its own members and set the example for the rest of the school system. And in doing so, disenfranchise as many people as they could conceivably do so in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luz. And finally, Sydney Van Wolk.
Good afternoon, good evening. I come to you today wearing many hats. I am a former educator of CCSD. I am a Christian. I am the sister of a Presbyterian minister. I am a community activist. I'm someone who ran for the very seat that you are sitting in. It is extremely concerning to me that with all of the issues that CCSD has before them, we are beginning this new session with prayer. You have an obligation to all of your students, all of your teachers, no matter what their faith is, to represent everyone. And when it's stated in the agenda today that you want to bring in faith leaders from non-secular, let's be real here. If the line that we're drawing is not technically illegal, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than that. And I ask that you hold yourself in a higher standard than that. That what we're asking is that we are more than just not technically illegal, but standing in what is right. And what is right is not me putting my religion out in front of everyone else. That we already have a moment of silence. And during that moment, if you wish to pray, that is great. But like the people who spoke before me said, it is divisive. I'm trained in trauma-informed care. And what you may not realize is how many people have been traumatized by the church or other religions. And you are creating an environment that is excluding members of our community, of our students, of our faculty. So I just ask that you take that into consideration with your vote today.
Thank you, Ms. Van Volk. And now I will read the online comments. Can you please time me for each one? This one is from Joan Chard. It says, taking the mystery out of the term civil disobedience, Martin Luther King identified 4 steps in the process of a nonviolent campaign. 1 must collect facts and determine if there is a problem. The second step is negotiation. Postpone direct action in order to give negotiations a chance to work. 1 3, one must purify oneself. One must be trained to be nonviolent. Finally, if all else fails, one must turn to direct action. Hopefully, nonviolent protests will touch the conscience of the community. A community that has refused to negotiate is focused to confront the issue. King makes it clear that civility is never synonymous with mere niceness, and it is certainly not passivity. Civility demands that citizens stand up for what they think is right and be willing to go to the streets and protest for it. King reminds us that violence never strengthens a community, but violence makes negotiation less likely, and violence always undermines the law. King said that because his critics were men of genuine goodwill, he was willing to answer them in patient and reasonable terms.
Excuse me, Ms. Bailey, I hate to interrupt, and I know your intent is marvelous, but per policy BE, comments that come to us online are to be summarized by noting which agenda items were addressed and how many people spoke for or against the agenda. Do you have that available?
No, ma'am, I just have the list that was given to me.
Thought there was someone was going to prepare a summary for her. I always do a cursory glance and just kind of.
Right, we have.
Trustees, to summarize, there were 30+ comments received pertaining to policies BC and BDG on various sides of the opinion regarding each policy. Other comments received focused on topics such as information responses, time for staff, curriculum, and public comment submission. Additionally, there were comments related to Esser 3 funding sources.
Thank you, Ms. Denny.
All right, moving on, so that takes care of our public comments. Moving on to item 8A, Head Start and Early Head Start Fiscal Year 24 funding application. Ms. Foxworth?
Good evening, Board Chair McKinney, Vice Chair Bailey, Board of Trustees, and Superintendent Kennedy. I'm here to present the 23-24 Head Start budget. CCSD has been the grantee for Head Start grants since 2011. We are seeking your approval of the grant application for federal funds. The budget will be submitted to the Office of Head Start on March 1st, but because of all the approvals, it does take this amount of time. So we have gone through audit and finance, and you have the packet in the budget in your packet, and I'm available, as well as Ms. Rock and Ms. Davis, to answer any questions you may have.
And because normally in February, when we get back on track, we would have discussed this at Committee of the Whole. So I'm going to share some of the concerns that the Committee of the Whole had, I mean, not the Committee of the Whole, the Audit and Finance had. And we thought it would be very important that Ms. Foxworth explain to the board exactly the school district's obligation under Head Start, because a lot of this is federally funded, and we are only paying for a small portion of the teachers.
Correct.
So,
what you see in front of you is all, the 10.8 million is all federally funded through the Office of Head Start. We do have some non-federal share, and we are working towards some funding for match to fund 3K teachers as they receive certification, and I can get that exact amount. But the money that you see in front of you is all federal funding, the 10.8, the $10 million.
and I think the question was from the committee was there any could you give us at this time what you anticipate the school district's obligation and continuing the Head Start, with the understanding that what we're trying to do is to move as much money into this type of program as possible?
Sure. Number one, one of the things we're doing with the grant is we have looked and examined our data and looked at our waiting list data. We are in the process of converting from, there's some of the 4 schools are currently funded called CD Head Start Collaboration. We are in the process of moving those for next year into a different funding source called CERDEP. Those slots, the 4K program will continue, will look the same. It will be just under a different funding source. Those slots will be converted to Early Head Start, which is our largest waiting list. And then we're also adding a couple additional 3K Head Start classrooms. But we are asking for, the overall will be a reduction in slots because the number of Early Head Start is 8 per class for 2 adults and 17 for Head Start. So it looks like an overall reduction. That's why we're working with our Office of Head Start to help us with what we call as a conversion. And that's what we're being submitted, and that's what is in front of you.
And this application has to be filed on March to be in compliance.
Correct. And the reason we come to you in January is because we have, in addition to getting the board chair signature and your approval, we do have to have the approved minutes, which won't come out until February. So that is why every year we come to you in January so we can be in compliance with the guidelines and get it to the Office of Head Start by March 1st at the latest.
Are there other questions or comments from Ms. Foxworth? You're satisfied?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question for Mr. Grabowski. Was there anything about the program that raised any red flags among the Finance and Audit Committee?
No, really, it was just trying to get an understanding of any future obligations that the CCSD may incur if we increase the program, and how we were going to find funding for it to try to build on the success of what the federal government is funding right now. That was the main topic of discussion.
And what was the result of the discussion?
The main part that we're asking CCSD to contribute is the match for as the teachers become certified, the 3K teachers become certified, because that is not a requirement, that we do close to a 50% match. And Avis, what is the total cost for that?
It's about $1.4 billion.
That's already, how much is already being invested? So if we add more classrooms, it would be more 3K classrooms. That would be an additional investment.
And then that would come in front of, if I understand it, would come in front of the board. And at that time, Ms. Williams would find all this money and we'd be in good shape.
Of
and
course
we'd
she
expand
would.
the program, correct?
So Ms. Foxworth, could you explain the importance of getting the pre-K teachers certified, please, the staff certified?
Sure. I've been in this position for like 3 or 4 years, but I've worked in this department for a long time, and we've looked at data. And what we are noticing is that the students coming into 4K, remember how we have our program structured here in Charleston, is Early Head Start is 0 to 36 months. Majority of 3-year-olds are served in our Head Start. That's what Head Start majority serves. And then they go into our 4K program. We were looking at data and we realized our teachers who were certified had better out. The 3K teachers that were certified, the students were coming out better. And so that's why we've been transitioning. But we value our Head Start teachers that have been committed. So our goal is not to remove them. It is to work with them and help. We've been working with them in conjunction with the HR department to get them started at Trident Tech or wherever they are and get their certification. And so that has been successful because we want them to stay. And those who don't want to do, then that's their choice. But we want to invest in them because we all know we need teachers, and particularly teachers of color. So we want to invest in our teachers, and that's what we've been doing.
And also, would you mind speaking about our CCSD's collaboration with the state on the CERDEP expansion and the importance of that funding?
Sure. So we've been, for years and years, Charleston County School District was not a CERDEP. CERDEP is the Child Early Reading Education Development Program. It's the state's 4K funding stream. For years, we were not a CERDEP district, but 2 years ago, this is our second year, we became eligible. And so we've been slowly using that CERDEP funding to expand so we can continue the expanding pre-K. And so those, the 4 schools that were CD Head Start, the collaboration, have always been eligible to be CERDEP, but we did not want to overwhelm the schools. And so we never had them as Head Start and CERDEP. So now that we have this opportunity to add more early and we can move them into CERDEP, we think that's best for the teachers, students, and the schools. So that's what we're doing. So it's been a partnership. We just got our application to expand CERDEP, so we're going to be looking at our approved CERDEP sites. The state gives us the list of schools. They're based on the poverty level. And so we're looking at that now to see, in addition to those 4 schools, if there's any other ones we want to include in CERDEP for next year.
Ms. Foxworth, let me just say thank you. This is what I love to hear. If we're going to spend money, I am so excited that we are spending it early and meeting the needs early on. So thank you for your work, and I look forward to seeing the data to see, how this is working and the success rate. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so I'll just add to that, a major component of the district's effort to improve student outcomes is to address early childhood learning. And so that includes both the expansion of early childhood availability here in the county, as well as the improvement of the programs that we have through the additional certifications.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Is there a motion to approve the early Head Start funding application for the grant period June 1st, 2023 to May 31st, 2024?
I move to approve it.
Second it.
And Ms. Watley and Mr. Grabowski, thank you. Any more discussion? We'll call for the vote. Thank you, and the motion passes. We will go on to the next item, which is item 8B, fixed cost of ownership. Mr. Bowry.
Yes, ma'am. So this is a request to reallocate a portion of our contingency funds out of the $51 million program. We set aside money at the beginning of the year in the event that we have an urgent and
Not
compelling.
many people at the board meeting.
Pardon me?
Oh,
Dr. Temple?
I'm good. I'm sorry.
Okay. Go.
Yes, ma'am. So at the beginning of the year, we set aside funds for urgent and compelling needs and contingency. We're well over halfway through the year. As such, we'd like to distribute some of those funds. We have 18 programs in fixed cost of ownership. 12 of those began this year with unfunded requirements. So we take a look at the programs that have unfunded requirements and look at the highest and best use of the really small amount of money that we're moving from contingency. The recommendation from staff is to split it among facilities management, media center, and furniture fixtures and equipment. Each of those programs has a requirement for those funds. Going back to a question from last month from Ms. Roberson about equity, just a reminder on how we manage all of these programs. It's really threefold. One is we look for systems use. So if we have a system that we install in every school, we simply base on an age of that system. Every school gets the same system. They're replaced on age. The second way we replace items is based on condition. So the big portion of that's in facilities. We look at the condition of each building system, and it's replaced when it's needed. The highest need gets to work first. And then thirdly, if everything is all equal, that's how it's managed. The money's distributed equally among all the schools, whether it's high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, like we would do with band instruments as an example. So in this case, the three accounts that are getting the funds, we can certainly provide we can certainly provide a long-term assessment of how we provide funds to those accounts, but it will be looked at from those three methods primarily.
Maybe we defer to Mr. Grabowski's comment and then Mr. Or were you going to make a committee comment, Mr. Kelly?
Go ahead. No, just had a question.
The committee, when we reviewed this and looked at it, you'll notice that the contingency fund is $688,000 $200,000, and we will have used 70% of the contingency fund, and we're halfway through the year. And one of the concerns by the committee was, you've got furniture and fixtures, you've got an approved budget, a proposed budget, and we're already $200,000 over and above the proposed budget. Now, we understood that a contingency is set up, but the biggest concern was what is to stop coming in front of us in next month and asking to move more of the contingency fund, which will be now down to only $193,000. So that was the committee's main concern.
Yes, sir. And to address that, our intention is in the early spring, we would come back to you to reallocate the remainder of the contingency funds and any other program that might not have spent funds, bring those together and decide where they'll go. So this is kind of a midterm, let's pull some of the money. And those three accounts that we're looking at moving money to, their expenditure rate is 87, 90, and 96% expended. So they're well underway of spending the money that they have. And we believe that they can easily utilize these funds for their backlog.
Mr. Kelly?
I'm content.
Okay. Ms. Roberson?
Ms. Ferrari, thank you for this report. I completely understand it. I do have a question for you. I know you said you have your department heads, your program managers, they go out and they do the assessments. I honestly believe that, the people perish for lack of knowledge. You mentioned that you make sure that everything is equal. If one school have it, you want to make sure that all the schools have it. And then you move to the next category of how things are dispersed. What happens if something is missed? And let me give you an example. If Stall has a drill mat, and my school, St. John's ROTC program would like to have a drill mat, and they miss it and it's not on your inventory list. How do we make that happen?
So what happens is the individual teacher or program manager at that school, so in this case, JROTC, the colonel,
Yes.
lieutenant colonel, would go to his principal
Okay.
with a resource allocation request, a work order.
Okay.
And the bookkeeper, clerk, whoever enters their work orders would put that into the system. At that point, it would be considered among the rest of the requests, and we would look at it. But in that case, I know for a fact, I don't have a person that goes out and checks to make sure every ROTC program has the drill mat.
Okay.
But the schools are certainly welcome to submit those. And in which case we look at it and go, the other schools don't have it, or all of them have, but this one, and we make sure that it gets done. The same holds for upgrades. So a great example that we're going through now are batting cages. In the past, the district built no batting cages. Then we built batting cages with no covers. And now we're building batting cages with covers. And so we've got a wide range of schools within that spectrum. Our first goal is to make sure that they all have batting cages. And if we're giving a school that doesn't have one, a new batting cage, it gets a cover on it, because that's now how we're doing it. So in a lot of cases, systems are upgraded over time as well.
Okay, could you tell me again,
Resource allocation request, it's another word for a work order.
Okay.
They just need to put a work order into the system, and every school knows how to submit work orders.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Baroli, I have a question for you. The sports facility that was built in North Charleston, I think it's a football arena.
Yes, ma'am.
It's my understanding from the folks at City Hall that it was built without any locker rooms or anything like that. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, ma'am. When we designed that stadium, as well as the District 2 stadium in Mount Pleasant, we took athletic directors with us and looked at other stadiums around the state. And the recommendation was to not build showers in each of the facilities. Each of the facilities has locker rooms. They just do not have showers. What we found across the district is that our athletes aren't using the existing showers that we have. They're simply going straight home. I know that doesn't make many parents very happy, but you can't force a child into the shower. And so we did not build them in the two regional stadiums. We actually have an estimate, to do that. They could certainly be added. Right now, it's just not a high enough priority because we are short actual athletic facilities, especially in North Charleston at this point.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
What if the parents wanted those showers to be built and it was a big enough demand for it? How would we go about getting that done?
So if the board is interested, I would come to you all with a recommendation for funding, and I would also tell you where the money's not going to go if we fund that per se. But that's how it would happen. The biggest challenge we have with that is the number of showers. I could easily build 2 showers for 50 football players. Those will clearly not be used. I could build 50 showers and they might be used. So it's finding the right mix of showers. We came up with an estimate in the middle. Again, it was about a $1.3 million project to simply add showers to those locker rooms at the District 4 Stadium. At which point, I'm sure those in Mount Pleasant will say, why don't we get them at our stadium as well? And then it starts rolling in that direction. So a $1.3 million project may evolve into a $10 million project if we look across the district.
So the stadium in Mount Pleasant does not have showers?
I'm sorry,
Correct.
Madam Chair, I'd like to raise a question of privilege. Call for the order of the day, please. I'd
Okay.
like to stick to our agenda, if you don't mind.
So
It's a
yes.
chair's
So-
decision.
So agreed. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So is there a motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on our attached resolution?
I move to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on our agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any more discussion? Cast your ballot. And the motion carries. We will move on to the next item, C with procurements. Ms. Williams, or excuse me, it's Mr. Wilcher.
I'll be
Oh.
covering it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So what you have before you is a list of procurements greater than 250,000. This is a byproduct of the March 22 Board of Trustees directive for all purchases greater than 250,000 to be brought forward to the board. On the list that you have before you, there are 12 items equaling $22.6 million. The majority of them are related to facilities and capital construction. This list is not specific to only capital construction and maintenance. It also includes any purchase from the district greater than 250,000. This list is designed to give you transparency into the purchases, the type of procurement, a brief description of the project, the fund source, and which office is holding this particular project. I'll entertain any questions that you all have.
And this is the fun one. 250,000 and above. And when you look at this list, and I would hope that the public and all of my fellow board members do look at this list, because it's kind of complicated, because what you're trying to manage is contracts that were entered into, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
These contracts have not been entered into yet. These are the selected vendors based on
So
the
these are all,
solicitation
this is all new
process.
money and budgeted money under different levels.
Yes, this is all budgeted. These are all budgeted funds. This is not, nothing here has not been approved in the fiscal year budget.
And all of these funds, but when we say this fiscal year budget, we're still talking about agreements that were entered into
So
prior to this year, because
no.
we're using phase 4 and phase 5 funding.
So when the budget is approved, it's approved with the body of work and the scope of work attached to it. What this is identifying the selected vendors through the procurement process. So whereas the board has approved the budget and the scope of work, this is identifying the associated vendors that have been selected to bring forth the scope of work that has already been approved and budgeted for.
So the committee's main concern in reviewing this, and one of the things we always look for, or is what we're trying to look for, is when we are presented with something that may be new money, something that's not within the budget or not discussed. And we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Kennedy on the Esser funding and how that works, which I think is going to be very helpful to all to understanding this. because one of the main concerns that the committee had was item 10. This involves approval of an Esser item. There were numerous issues when talking about this specific request, as it appeared that it had come up one time and there was a potential conflict with a board member being involved, and the request was then pulled or denied. Was not present for that. I think there's also some questions as to exactly what the board exemptions were. Staff was notified of that. We were advised that we'd be getting a list and an explanation as to what board exemptions actually means. And the Esser fund request is for $450,000, and there was no, $450,000, there was no presentation given or anything. So you start to think about, and we'll get into this when we discuss the Esser funds with Dr. Kennedy, we're an audit and finance committee. We're required to audit and everything, or overview the audits, procedures, and policies that are being presented. With Esser funds, which I'm sure we'll get in on the discussion, there's the discretion on the audit still relies heavily on the board being involved in the committee. And this is one of these type of audit items that comes in, and you see the $450,000, and the justification is that they've been around for 10 years and they're doing a really good job. That's the data. That's it. And then there was a lot of discussion about startup companies and being used on Esser funds. So it really, when you get one of these and you see $250,000 or $450,000, and I see one line item, I can understand your capital budget, your capital constructions and all that. But when you come into an Esser and there are specific requirements which we are accountable for as a board, I feel very uncomfortable with approving that item.
The particular exemptions that are spoke of, so there are several board exemptions for procurement items. Educational services, as well as staff development, fall under those exemptions. And what that means is you don't have to go out for a competitive bid for those particular items. The same holds true for thing about financial services as it relates to audit services. So when you see board exemption, that's what that means. The Esser items went through a budget development and an approval process by the state. So there was oversight there. As far as allowable activities, this particular vendor did fall within the allowable activities that are identified under Esser. And the board exemption is also allowable. And I think we also discussed at the committee meeting that to the best of our knowledge, there was no conflict of interest with board members with this particular vendor.
And if I may, Ms. Williams, I appreciate that clarification. And Mr. Grabowski, I certainly do appreciate the thorough review of these items. The item 10 was not disapproved or disallowed by any other governing body. Instead, the Kids on Point serves various schools in CCSD, and the thought process was that those schools would come together and be funded collectively under one piece under Esser versus doing so disparately in order to provide, quite frankly, a little more transparency and unification in our efforts to vet this program. Although Ms. Simmons is not here this evening, she is in Virginia doing some professional development. This program was vetted for its effectiveness, if I might speak out of shop, so do forgive me, on student achievement. And the gains made by various schools were so noteworthy that other principals asked if they could be involved. And so that's the point that we as the academic side of the house, with the wisdom and guidance of Ms. Williams, pulled together this under the Esser piece. Again, I certainly understand the oversight and your desire to make thoughtful fiscal decisions, but please know that we did do some due diligence around this item and some other items related to Esser, particularly as in regards to student achievement. And I'm happy to discuss it with you one-on-one or collectively as a body as needed.
Would you tell us what schools participate?
Mr. Cobb, do you have that information right handy? I appreciate that. We certainly can provide it to you, Mrs. McKinney. There were several that had already vetted it, but we can get that information and provide it to you in the board brief or a follow-up if you prefer. Okay. Mr. Grabowski, does that help a little bit with that item?
I kind of wish, if we'd looked at the agenda, that we'd had the opportunity to have Dr. Kennedy talk about the Esser application process, the auditing.
Sure.
Because I did have a chance to review the government's side, what we should be doing, being worried about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that I'm losing any sleep over it. But nevertheless, I think it's very important for my fellow board members to understand exactly when this, especially if we get to the situation where there is new money coming out and it being considered into the budget. I think it's very important from this point on, because a lot of what we're dealing with now has been decided, by prior boards.
I understand and I appreciate that.
I raised some questions regarding this item, and I would be glad to share it. I shared them with Mr. Grabowski because I think that item 10 is a program, and we want to be sure that it is effective and that knowing what schools are using it and that schools want this particular program, because I in particular am concerned that our ESSER dollars are supporting what our schools want rather than us supporting programs that may be just offered as nonprofits to our schools.
Thank you for that, Dr. Temple. We'd be happy to share with you the data review and what we've done in regards to return on investment with Kids on Point.
So I have a question for Ms. Williams and Mr. Grabowski. Since it seems like the only concern in this list are the two ESSER expenditures, could we exclude those two and consider the others for a motion? Or is it a proposed all or none?
Just want to flag for the second ESSER funded project, it's directly related to letters training. And I know the academic team had some concerns about the timing if it's not approved. I don't know if Anita or Terry wants to speak to that.
I'm happy to. We have Susan Rawlings on the call today, who's our director of the core literacy work, and Terry Nichols is one of our associate superintendents here who manages that body of work. And we have several cohorts of training that are scheduled to begin in the spring that rely on your approval of the letters work tonight around phonics, phonological awareness, et cetera. Ms. Nichols, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but are there additional things you or Mrs. Rawlings, who's patiently awaiting the arrival of twins at home, Mrs. Rawlings, that you'd like to add?
I'll let Susan talk for a second if she misses something else.
Susan, please go
Sure.
ahead.
So LETTERS stands for the Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. And what it is an in-depth training for teachers geared toward our early childhood teachers, so kindergarten through third grade, around current research and best practices on how to teach reading and spelling and writing. Part of Read to Succeed legislation, which has been around for several years now in South Carolina, has aimed at our colleges, our higher education institutes, to correct the way and make sure that teachers are being trained around best practices whenever it comes to what the teachers that they are graduating. To try to remedy some of that, they have instituted Read to Succeed coursework that is required for our teachers and all of that. But LETTERS is something that the state has also recently been supporting, and they are supporting the funding of training for roughly half of our schools, those that have been designated as Palmetto Literacy Project schools. And this funding would allow for the teachers at the remaining CCSD elementary schools to engage in that high quality training that the state is not funding for all schools.
And I'm sorry, I mean, I know we discussed this at the Committee on Audit and Finance, but I don't see it for the board for consideration.
It's item 12 on
Item
the
12.
Yes, on the list.
Thank you,
Oh, at the
Mr.
bottom.
Grabowski. That's what I was trying to figure out what item we were talking about.
It's item 12. It was added on.
It's been on this list. It just, the acronyms are not there. We actually spelled out the
Got it.
acronyms in the agenda item.
And we also received a board agenda item for it.
And the committee, the way the committee was looking at this is that the funding that the state had required and paid for, all this really was is to try to expand it to all schools. I mean, the principals were asking for this. So this 1.32, Ms. Williams was able to find magically into the budget to cover the wonderful money for a phenomenal program. So the committee was quite happy in hearing how it was being applied and that we were expanding it to all schools.
Yes, sir. And that would go to fund the training for an additional 949 teachers in Charleston County to expand that offering, not only to our K-3 teachers, but also to our special education teachers, our multilingual teachers, and our literacy interventionists, as well as our principals and assistant principals and literacy coaches at our schools.
And just for clarification, this is not a startup. This is something that's science-based and you have data on the effectiveness.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Because it was started, this was a requirement by the state. The state started this, the state funded it, and now we're just being asked for additional money to expand it to all teachers. Third down.
So couple points. One, we were asked to take a look some time ago across the Southeast to determine which school districts, which states were making progress with student outcomes and find out what they were doing. So this particular training is used throughout the state of Mississippi. We talked last spring with the state superintendent of education of Mississippi, Dr. Carrie Wright, who she did retire on June 30 before she retired. And we explored with her and her staff very deeply what are the strategies that they were using to move from 50th on the reading test across all states up to 35th. And so this is one of the trainings that they did. Now the state of South Carolina has it for a limited number of schools, the Palmetto priority literacy schools. And what this does, it expands it through all of our elementary schools. So
and I'll also note, Mr. Kennedy, that North Carolina also has the same requirement for their teachers. They have been able to fund it for all of their K-3 teachers. So this is something that many states are engaging in. It's just that the state of South Carolina at this time could not fund it for all of their teachers.
So my question is on the printout for the board approval procurement worksheet. It's the 1.3 million, but then we have another board agenda item for the 3.6. So I assume that's the difference between what's required for the state and then what we want to offer across the district.
The training itself is pretty intense. So, I mean, a teacher has to make a really dedicated commitment to get the training done over. It's 2 volumes, so typically over a 2-year period, one volume per year. What the state is currently paying, authorizing, I think it's like $500 per volume. What we're contemplating here is to actually increase the amount of the stipend to teachers to make sure as an enticement that they do take the training. And so instead of a $500 stipend per volume, it's a $1,000 stipend per volume. So that's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes, and so that is in collaboration with some of our teacher groups that we talk to about the quality of life that teachers encounter. And so we are asking them to take on additional work by taking this training, and we're proposing to compensate them for that.
Sorry, may I ask?
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kennedy, how many hours do you anticipate a teacher would need to put in to get through one volume?
Susan, please.
Sure. Yep. The state estimates, as well as Voyager, the company who this is through, approximately 120 hours. But part of that is actually in class. So like whenever they're in front of student work, and through bridge to practice activity. So this professional development uses best practices in adult learning, where they work through a lesson, and then there are activities to actually take the learning that they have just encountered and just owned and actually put it immediately into practice with students. And so across this training, they are actually building portfolios for students that they're working with directly in the application of their learning. But total between the outside of class and then the inside of class is approximately 120 hours.
Mr. Kelly, thank you for asking that question. Shows that this board's dedication to putting teachers first and thinking about not overwhelming them. What's good about this is that teachers can also use the time, as Ms. Dunmeyer Roberson knows from her time in the classroom, and Mrs. McKinney and Mrs. Bailey, and Mrs. Waters, they can use that time in professional development for recertification purposes. So they can directly use that time to renew their certificate in addition to growing professionally. And in addition to that, our adding the stipend has been very well received by principals and groups of teachers with whom we've discussed this. So thank you again for that. Thank you.
Certainly.
Yeah, and I was just going to add on to that it also counts for all 4 of the state required Read to Succeed courses that all of our classroom teachers are required to have. They have 2 renewal cycles to obtain that certification to become a Read to Succeed certified teacher. And letters training does fulfill that requirement for all 4 of those courses.
I also like the model that you're using where teachers learn and then they have a chance to practice and reflect on what they're learning, because then they can come back and work with their colleagues again for what worked and what didn't work. Sounds like a good model to me.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Yeah, the root, and thank you for seeing the root of the question was actually one of math. And $1,000 for 150 hours of work is 15 cents an hour. That's not a number that I'm really excited about, especially when we are trying to retain quality teachers. Is this a number that we can go back and make, let's say, better than minimum wage as a starting point? Yeah, it seems like 15 cents an hour, $1,000 for 150 hours of work is unacceptable. I wouldn't do it. And I don't think we should ask our teachers to either. Is that a number that we can rework?
So with the state Palmetto literacy schools, I think and Susan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a requirement that the teachers in those schools participate in this training. So that's a PD that's mandated by the state. And so what we are doing, including those teachers, we are doubling what the state the stipends that the state's paying. So we are doubling that. The state says $500, and we are doubling that.
So address what Mr. Kelly said. Is there a compromise that we offer? Well, we have to require this because it's required by the state, to just the teachers that it's required for, and up the stipend and do other teachers later.
Yeah, because the state offers 7.5 cents an hour, I don't think validates us offering 15 cents an hour.
So this, I understand, I do understand the math. And excuse me, I'm sorry. And I would also contend, not have to contend, I mean, we look at the data that throughout our district, not only in the Palmetto priority schools, there's huge problems with reading, huge problems. If you take a look at the spring of last year, SC Ready, 77.1% of our white students read either on or above grade level. With African American, it's 23.1%. So that's a 54-point gap. It is a huge gap that I haven't seen elsewhere. The same thing with our Hispanic students, the 45.7% gap. And so if we only limit it to the handful of schools, then we are not going to be able to spread this knowledge throughout our teaching corps. And it's not just the primary grade teachers, it's like the ESOL teachers, it's our special ed teachers. We're trying to get this embedded into the culture of what we do with reading. So I understand the math in terms of being able to pay more, and we are trying to do that, but there's also the competing side of how much we can allocate in any one given program.
Understood. And I think, and I wasn't suggesting that we limit this program to a certain set of schools. I don't think that's wise, but I would certainly like to see an allocation that is a bit more appropriate to the amount of work needed. You said it's a substantial amount of work over 3 years. So I'd like to see us, I think we can do better.
Yeah, so
I'll leave it
so noted. So with your board's permission, we can go back and take a look at the the Esser dollars and how much more we might be able to tease out of that. But I would encourage, ask that you all take this up tonight so that we get the teachers in the training program this spring.
And I don't have a problem with number 12. I think that it's necessary. But I want to, Mr. Cabrossi, go back to number 10 and ask that this go back to the committee. I think that there's just a lot, I would have appreciated if Ms. Simmons was here to really give us some concrete data. This program says that they followed the kids from elementary school through graduation and beyond. I really would like, before we allocate more monies to this program, to find out exactly, some real results, some real data as to, the kids that they started this program in 2009, and this is where Demarius is, and this is what this person is doing, and it would give us, I think we could make a more informed decision on allocating more resources to a program that we have data on, vice just one blanket statement that has been around for a decade.
We certainly can provide that. I'll work with Ms. Simmons. I was able to pull up a list of some of the schools that Kids on Point serves. Burke, Charleston Progressive, Shakora, James Simmons, Mitchell, Meminger, Sanders Clyde, Simmons Pinckney, Allegro, Charleston Charter, Meeting Street, CDA, et cetera. So we'll certainly do that, Mrs. Dunbar Roberson, and provide that to the board so that you can look at that data. Thank you for that. I'll work with Ms. Simmons.
It's not an emergency that they need this money tonight. Like the letters program, they need to do this tonight, but number 10.
But can we make sure it comes back to the next meeting, because it's a summer program, I think that this money is going to, and people do start ramping up.
They start planning and preparing for their summer
right.
pieces. So
in
we can
February,
even
yes.
provide maybe a preliminary, Ms. Simmons gets back, and we may be able to send something out in the board brief to you, Mrs. Dunbar Roberson, and follow up with you, Mr. Gabrowski, to make sure that all is set and ready.
And I appreciate it. Like I said, I think this would have been a lot easier following Dr. Kennedy's
Sure.
Esser presentation, but nevertheless, if I agree, I think we can push it through on February and move it forward.
So my
Thank you so much.
question is the amount of money for line item 12, is it 1.3 or 3.6?
So I'm sorry, go ahead, question.
It's the cumulative cost for the program is 3.6. That includes the actual training plus the stipends.
But what's on here on the 250 list
It's
is a
just the training.
contract
Yes.
that exceeds the $250,000. So the difference then is we are paying with, it's not a contract, it's paying through district funds
Okay.
on the stipend.
Now I understand. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Do I hear a motion concerning the procurement worksheet for items over the $250,000?
Yeah, I move that we approve the worksheet with the exception of line item 10.
I second it.
Any more discussion? All right, if you will cast your vote, please. And the motion passes. We will go on to item D, the Esser funding summary. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through the American Rescue Plan, the district was allocated 3 pots of money under Esser 1, 2, and 3. Those respective amounts were 13.4 million, 72.63 million, and 163.2 million. What this is a summary at a high level of the total funding that we received under each Esser allocation 1, 2, and 3, the respective allowable spend categories, what this initial spend plan was, and what we've expended to date. And if you'll see on the summary for Esser 1, we've completely expended at 13.4 million down on allowable expenses. And keep in mind, when we spend, it's a reimbursement. So it has to go through federal scrutiny for approval to make sure that all of our activities were allowable and that we are spending in accordance with our approved plan. For Esser 2, the original allocation was 72.6 million. We are coming to the sunsetting period for Esser 2. We have a remaining balance of $4.3 million. We have about $11.6 million encumbered for the current fiscal year. Encumbered meaning associated with a contract tied to an existing body of work that we're spending down. For Esser 3, this was our largest pot of money. We have until September of 2024 to expend the funds. We were awarded 163.2 million. We have expended 34.86 to date. And we have $22.9 million encumbered. Remaining balance is a $93.4 million. One thing to note with the remaining balance, all of the funds have been allocated based on the plan, the approved plan. Any budget amendments that we've submitted have to go through federal scrutiny and approval, excuse me. And these are just what we've expended to date. There was some question around some of the contractual services that we've expended for Esser 3, the larger bucket of money. This includes some contract services, Art Pot, Charleston Hope, Vision to Learn, the Low Country Education Consortium is here, mental health services, calming rooms. There's an array of expenditures that have hit the Esser funds that are all within the 15 allowable categories for Esser 3. What questions do you have, please?
Line 15, what are some examples of other activities?
So other activities are as defined. It's for the operation and continuity of services and local education agencies and continuing to employ existing staff for the local education agency, that's CCSD. So for instance, when we paid for overlay positions, so when we held schools harmless for certain positions, meaning if a school's enrollment dropped as a byproduct of the impact of COVID, as opposed to shifting staff out of the school, we maintained that person in that school fully funded. For contractual support and services, we used to supplement some of the personnel cost. So if an employee was $50,000, $25,000 might have been on the general fund, and we funded the other $25,000 with Esser funds. So it was for stabilization activities essentially located as a byproduct of the impact of COVID.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions?
I do. And this may or may not be for you, Ms. Williams, maybe Superintendent Kennedy can answer this. I totally understand the budget as presented. My question is, outside of the funds allocated to each principals, for their individual buildings, I keep hearing about the learning loss in the different educational support programs, but it seems like most of them are in D20. They're downtown. Has any vendor offered up any contracts or for D9 or D23?
So, Mr. Robertson, I'm not sure about individual vendors, but let me just explain a little bit about.
Has there been any Esser funds out in D8 for educational support services for learning loss?
So that Ms. Williams said there are 3 funding funds. That's one, $13.4 million. And that was simply for to get schools open up right after the
Yeah,
beginning of
not
COVID.
Esser 1 and Esser 2,
Oh,
Esser
it's
3.
three. So,
Mhm.
so yes, we have talked about the summer training programs, summer schools.
Ms. Dunbar Roberson, the answer is yes. We have various initiatives that have targeted kids across the district, primarily for these, for the ESSER 3 funds, though in complete transparency. Principals develop plans based on their own individual data and where they thought students needed support and in what areas, whether Mrs. Dunbar Roberson, that be mental health, but primarily academic achievement and due to COVID learning loss. So I could pull District 9 and District 23's plan, and we could work with the principals to give each of you, if you'd prefer, an overview of what the principals in your area thought most poignant to do in their area. Now, you referenced down the downtown district specifically. Mr. Kennedy did give charge to principals and let them know that if they wanted to come together in a feeder pattern and develop a plan for ESSER 3 funding, that it could be considered like other school funding. And we did have principals downtown that did so and developed the D20 PCP. I know right now that there is a cohort of principals out in the district that you serve, District 23, that is coming together, and they're scheduled to meet with us. I believe it's next week, to review their proposal and the review of their plan. And we've let principals know that if they want to come together again and do that in whatever feeder pattern, like the District 20 plan, that they can do so. I don't know if that answers your question, but I believe the answer is yes, ma'am. In different amounts
Okay.
and with different vendors based on principal requests that garnered teacher input.
That's part of it. Thank you very much for that.
Yes, ma'am.
But do we have any programs like what was on the previous?
Kids on Point, for
Correct.
example. Yes, ma'am. There are various vendors, and Mr. Cobb has done a brilliant job streamlining our ESSER processes and procedures, and has a list of our vendors. And we could perhaps provide that information to you in a board brief. I'm making a list, Mrs. Dunbar Roberson.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think the committee's biggest problem was trying to understand how all of this is audited to make sure this money is being spent properly. I know the federal has guidelines, but they put the onus on us to be doing all the audit processing. And I would be curious to see what type of, because I just have a hard time believing that we're talking, $300 million.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr.
And you're going to
Gillespie.
say that we haven't had some failures?
We were audited in this past cycle for fiscal year 22 on our on our ESSER funds, and we produced 0 audit findings. Just to kind of go over process, once the funds are allocated and the district drafts a plan, the district then submits that plan back for federal review to make sure we're in compliance with all the allowable spending of the grant. If we are out of compliance with the spending of the grant, we simply don't get reimbursed and we have to absorb it on the general fund. That has not happened. We have not submitted anything that has not been reimbursed or that is disallowable. Our audit also produced 0 audit findings when the ESSER funds were audited for fiscal 22.
But the problem with audits are your audit is only as good as far as you ask the auditor to go and how deep you're going to go.
We don't tell the auditors specifically what to audit for on ESSER. It has federal requirements. So the auditors are basing their audit off of the federal guidelines and requirements to do the audit.
And so if I could hop in here, I'll say that in regards to the audit finance piece, Mrs. Williams and Mr. Kennedy have really done a solid job managing the funding, and Mr. Cobb and Ms. Simmons helping managing the process. However, Mr. Grabowski, in complete transparency, as with any process, with any program, with any system, there are always ways to improve, and there are always, I don't necessarily know that I would categorize them as failures, but in transparency, there are programs that aren't as effective as we would like them to be. So in regards to the money management of it and the financing piece, our finance office has done a brilliant job. In regards to the return on investment analysis, how we look at student data and ensure we get the most pardon the phrase, bang for our buck. We are in a constant state of analyzing SEC, our summer enrichment camps, for example, that Mr. Kennedy referenced came out of Esser 3, our high dosage tutoring like Saga and other programs, to determine, is X amount that we've paid for Y program worth it? So in regards to the audit side of the house, Shauna and team have done a strong, really solid, no audit finding job. In regards to the programmatic side, we're doing our due diligence and better in ensuring that we don't have quote failures. And when we do, we catch it quickly, we turn it around and move forward to best serve kids.
Ms. Huggins, you very successfully intuitively answered one of the questions that I was going to ask. Outside of who we choose to use as a vendor and why that vendor and why not another vendor, and how many other vendors did you look at? Did you allow for competition and things of that nature? And I also wanted to ask about, I would like to address that first, but I also wanted to ask, it's my understanding that like municipalities also themselves received ESSER funds. Are we as a district working with the municipalities to ensure that those funds are most efficiently used as a community on a holistic level?
So the district is only in control of the funds that we receive for the federal dollars, as regarding the federal dollars. So we, as of right now, we don't have any financial partnerships with other agencies that have ESSER dollars.
No communication then, because the reason that I ask is because I've had a city councilman from the city of Charleston reach out to me about a project around the School of Math and Science in Windermere, about a drainage project there, and they wanted to ensure that we would work with the city on that. And then the city of North Charleston, I've been in communication with them about some of the ways they've been using the ESSER funds that they received, and they're now in need of, Ms. Huggins, you've heard us ask you plenty about that program that would be good for. So that's why I'm asking is, have we been thinking about it more long-term to work with these municipalities together to make sure that the funds are used in the most efficient way for each community?
So I think what you're asking is very valid, but to keep us on agenda, I think we have to move on unless you have a specific question from Ms. Williams' report.
Just about the ESSER funds, but, and then what I had asked about the vendors.
Yes, ma'am, I can attest to, we follow the procurement process. Mrs. Williams and Mr. Wiltshire ensure that we don't do anything outside of procurement code that helps ensure that our processes are competitive. Yes, ma'am.
All right, moving on to item 8E, capital programs phase 5, Ms. Shaw.
Ma'am, I'll take that.
All right, thank you.
Unfortunately, Ms. Shaw's father passed away this weekend, so
Oh,
we're
sorry.
her family and her thoughts and prayers. This is an information item only, so there's no vote on this. It's to inform the board of a realignment of funds, not a reallocation of funds. So we borrowed money in advance of the phase 5 sales tax program. And as we progress through the expenditures, we want to adjust the funding to make full use of those funds. Some projects move a little faster than others, some move a little slower than others. And this is simply a realignment of funds among 23 different projects and tasks. No change to the bottom line of any of the projects.
Thank you. Congratulations on that. Any questions on those? Item 8F, capital projects report, Ms. Costello.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and Superintendent Kennedy. I'd like to present the November capital projects report. Our revenues and collections for October were 5.1 million above our 2% projection in our financial model. For expenditures, the 2010 through 2016 capital program had 0 expenditures. The 2017 through 2022 program had $2.2 million. The 2023 through 2028 capital building program had $1.2 million in expenditures. And the 2023 through 2028 program funded with long-term debt had $38,000 in expenditures. The fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 23 program is underway. And the fixed cost of ownership project list for fiscal year 24 will be presented to the board in February. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
On to item 8G, the financial update, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what this report is a snapshot of revenues and expenditures comparing this point in time this year to this point in time last year. This is through the month of November 30th close. And what we have here in comparing revenues, for local tax revenues, we are $4.3 million lower compared to this year versus last year. That's not a reduction in revenues, it's a timing difference. We merely just received the revenue for local tax revenues earlier. For state revenues, we are 3.7% million higher this time this year in comparison to last year. This is due to the new education funding formula. The district was actually allocated more revenue, so this is reflective of that. As far as major changes in expenditures, we are $4.7 million higher in salaries and benefits. This was due to the FY23 approved budget where we allocated more salary incentives. So we expanded, we allotted for a $2,000 salary increase plus a step. We went to 97% of market, and we went from step 26 to 30. Thank you. And so this increase of 4.7 million is reflective of those increase in salaries. For supplies, we are lower by a little over $500,000 compared to last year. This is due to a decrease in purchasing of COVID supplies across the district. Our transfers are $2.4 million higher. Our transfers are our charter payments, and simply put, if they have higher enrollment, they receive additional dollars from us, and that's what that allocation is for. Our reserves is $2 million set aside. This is for 7-day enrollment changes. We have approximately a little less than 600,000 left. I'm sorry, 600,000 that we've used through November 30th. And our use of fund balance is projected for $18.8 million. What questions do you have?
No questions on the report. Thank you so much for being so thorough.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, we move on to item 9A, Policy Amendment BC, Board Meeting Protocol, and I believe our council is going to read the proposed policy for us before discussion and motion. No, just the changed part. Yeah. Just the proposed change part. Thank you for asking me to clarify that.
The proposed amendment is to add a board member may volunteer to open special and regular board meetings with a prayer for the board members for wisdom and discernment in accordance with South Carolina Code 6-1-160 and Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals case Wynn versus Town of Great Falls. The opening prayer shall comply with the prayer or invocation must be non-sectarian. The prayer of invocation may only reference God or the Almighty. The prayer or invocation may not invoke one religion in preference of others. The prayer or invocation must be directed only at the board members themselves. The prayer or invocation must precede public business and not be a part of public business.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Temple.
You're welcome.
Our school board, in my view, needs to maintain its focus on policies and practices that improve student achievement and teacher retention. Changes to the policy BC are very controversial in our community, and they could result in a costly legal action. As a church-going person of faith, I abide by the principle of the First Amendment to the Constitution and the separation of church and state. I believe that I and others are free to use the moment of silence for personal prayer and reflection. Currently, board agendas include a moment of silence, and the addition of this statement in the policy for prayer in the policy BC is unnecessary. I move that we not approve changes to policy BC as they are presented here.
Is there a second?
I second.
Discussion.
This is an extremely difficult, to be putting something into a policy for a board to follow. I mean, we look at the language and it says, a board member may volunteer to open a special session and regular board meetings. I've gone back and looked at a lot of the previous board meetings, and it seems to be common practice. Every once in a while, a board member gets up and says a prayer before public business. I am a person of faith, strong Christian beliefs. I do kind of have a problem with trying to put something into a policy. But when you look at the wording, it's may volunteer to open, but at the same time, I agree with Ms. Templeton that this is an issue, is a personal issue, and we are here to be looking out for the best interests of the students and their parents, the teachers, board member, and all citizens. So this is a very difficult one to think of, especially being a Christian and believing in prayer, and being part of many memberships in which we always open a prayer. So I appreciate the work that was done on the wording. But nevertheless, I do have a problem with putting it in as a policy.
Mr. Kelly?
So this policy was obviously intended to allow for, not require. The language is very, very intentional on that one. There's been a lot of public both support and objection to this. Most of the objection that I read, both in the form of online comments and some of the folks who are here, was based on a misunderstanding that there was a requirement. So do want to make that very clear. This is allowing, as was previously mentioned, previous boards did open in prayer, seemingly without the authority to do or not to do. Our board policy does currently say that we abide by Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules of Order does state that the opening of a meeting may contain a religious, it explicitly says a religious activity. And so the intent behind this is to solidify the fact that that is an option, not a requirement, in the event that someone were to raise objection to what again has been longstanding practice. So this is nothing new. We're simply saying it is still an option.
I would like to ditto Mr. Grabowski and with my statement. I am a woman of deep faith and much prayer, but I was elected to help every student learn and grow academically, and we need to focus on that. At this time, I would vote against a policy as it is reading.
I'd like to make a comment, just not to reiterate, so I won't, but one of the things I do want us to think about, especially, and I'm going to come back to if we potentially, and I hope we do go back to the Council of Great City Schools training, is that we're going to have to deal with policies that are outside the realm of student outcomes, but I would really love it if we would align our policy changes to the student outcomes focused governance work, because I also think that making sure that everything that's on this agenda is going to impact students in a positive way is really important. And so just want to offer that, not as a criticism, but just as another invitation for us all to re-engage the Council of the Great City Schools training.
Any other comments? All right,
if there's nothing further, I just want to give everyone an opportunity. I do want to say that I believe that focusing on the fact that there are powers and actually impacts beyond us is the intent of this, of a prayer at the beginning of a board meeting. So I think it does actually play to the decisions that we make, which absolutely impact students and teachers and the entire county. So I appreciate that this doesn't have a direct impact tomorrow morning on students when they walk into their school. But I think that the decisions that are made in this boardroom need to be ones that are discerning and are wise. And that's exactly what this policy allows for, is a prayer for discernment.
You know, I've heard a few comments about that this distracts from student outcomes, and I'm not actually able to really make that connection. This is just something we're going to vote on, and as it's already been stated, there's already a precedent for it. We're just putting it in the policy. So I don't really get how that is preventing or not, us not, we've, most everything we've discussed tonight has been on student outcomes and governance.
Outcomes. Let's not make that mistake.
We did, no, that's not up for debate right now, but we can definitely debate that.
So is there a motion to approve the first reading of amended policy BC?
Point of order.
Oh, sorry.
Dr. Temple already made a motion.
Oh, she sure did. Thank you. Would you kindly repeat your motion so that we can have a second and a vote?
We had a second on it.
I move Roberson. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any more discussion? Would you kindly repeat it for us anyway, since there's been so much discussion since you made your motion?
Did you get it in writing the first time I said it?
It is in writing. It is in writing. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Okay.
So no other discussion. We'll call for a vote.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait, I need to see it again. Let's see.
May I offer to read it to you?
Yes, I'm sorry. Let's
That's
see.
all right.
Okay. I'm trying to scribble things between my pad and whatever.
Motion to not approve first reading of amended policy BC, board meeting protocol, made by Dr. Temple, seconded by Ms. Roberson.
Got it.
So there's a double negative in the motion. So Dr. Temple, for clarity, your motion was to not approve. So a vote yay would be a vote against the motion, the policy.
Correct. Yay.
I see. So.
Oh, and I did.
Do you, well, please confirm your vote.
So if I'm voting.
So if you vote nay, you're voting down the motion that makes this one go away. So
I'm voting yay.
Yay is a vote to remove this item.
Correct.
I'm voting yay.
I appreciate the hand waving.
I see. Change vote.
Would everyone please confirm their vote? And Dr. Temple, if you will confirm your vote as you orally changed.
Yay.
Can you click on the box, yay, the one that says change?
Red box in the top right corner.
I don't see it.
Go to the top of the screen. It is in red with the waving hand, change vote.
I'm so sorry. I just don't see it.
Um,
Why don't you do a
and we
voice vote?
cannot accept her oral vote. All right, then I think we should do that. Thank you.
Would it be easier to make a statement without a double negative, Dr. Temple, would you be willing to withdraw your motion if I make a motion to approve it? That would make it a little easier.
Well, then we have to start all over with discussion if we change the motion. I think
Okay.
we just need to vote on the motion that is on the floor.
I'm sorry. Next time I won't make a double negative.
We know you won't. We have faith.
It's not.
Well, the yay on my summary at the bottoms has Dr. Temple. It says yay, Pamela McKinney, Darlene Roberson, Carol Temple, Courtney Waters, nay, Carlotta Bailey, Keith Grabowski, Ed Kelly, and Leah Watley.
I don't see an. Would it be possible to do a voice vote? Madam Chair?
I was informed because of FOIA, we have to have it recorded.
Understood.
Just can't find that.
It's just that once you do it, I can't change it. But if you want to manually, tell me voice what you vote. Like, Mr. Grabowski would be next. It's up to you.
So a voice vote by each person would be easier? Okay. So for the motion to not approve list reading of amended first reading of amended policy BC voice vote, do you want us to go in numerical order per seat? Mr. Grabowski, Mr. Grabowski?
Nay.
Nay.
Yay.
Yay.
Dr. Temple, they're asking for your vote again.
Yay. Yay.
Nay. Ms. Bailey, did you get recorded?
She has done hers.
So without a majority, it does not go forward as a first reading.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to move this policy to the next board meeting after we have a ninth seat.
I think it would have to go to committee of the whole first, if that's correct. Would you like to change?
It only has to go to committee, the whole, if you want to change something. It doesn't have to.
You could make a motion to table, and that means it comes up at the next meeting.
Automatically?
Or you can
Postpone.
make a motion to table until the next board meeting.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I said.
If you will state your motion.
I move that we postpone this item until our next board meeting.
Well, can you postpone after an item has been voted down?
It wasn't voted down.
What was voted was not to change, but had it gone the other way, it would have failed.
Okay. All right. So if you'll state your motion and then we'll ask for a second and discussion.
I move that we postpone this item until the next board meeting.
And you are referencing policy
The first reading of
9A.
BC.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second.
Ms. Bailey seconds. Is there more discussion?
I just want to say for the record that we just wasted time when I made that motion before, when we started the meeting, just for the record.
So noted. All right. Any other discussion? Cast your ballot and please check your vote.
Hold on.
And Dr. Temple, if you would kindly vote. The motion is to postpone this item until the next board meeting.
I don't have a screen to vote on.
May we accept a voice vote? If you will kindly cast your vote orally.
Nay.
Thank you for casting. And the motion carries. Agenda item 9B. If Ms. Paler, if you do we, as the hour is growing late, do we have to read it? Or can we say as printed ahead of time? All right. Is there a motion for a first reading of amended policy BDG as posted ahead of time for the public on the school website and for the board in writing?
Yes, ma'am. I so move.
Is there a second?
A second.
Is there discussion on this policy BDG?
I did.
Ms. Watt, I'm sorry. Hearing no discussion, we will call for the question and your vote. And the motion carries. On to item 10, other business. Do I hear a motion to appoint an ad hoc committee to review the superintendent search process?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to appoint an ad hoc committee to review the superintendent search process.
Is
I
there?
second.
So Mr. Grabowski made the motion and Ms. Watley seconded. Is there any discussion? All right, we will cast our
Can
vote.
you talk something about the ad hoc committee, who will be on it? How many people will be on it?
Yes, ma'am, we have to vote to approve it and then I can address those questions.
Thank you.
Certainly. And the motion carries. Now that we have approved an ad hoc committee for the superintendent search, I would like to follow that up with appointments and with the protocol that follows the approval. The chair appoints to that ad hoc committee Ms. Waters, Mrs. Roberson, Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Grabowski as chair. They will begin by reviewing and recommending search firms to the board who will then take action. Secondly, they will begin working with HR to create a superintendent package for review. And I thank each of you for agreeing to help us spearhead this search. On to item 11. Do I hear a motion to approve all items on the consent agenda since none were asked to
I
be
make a
removed?
motion to approve all items on consent.
Ms. Watley made the motion. Is there?
I second it.
We approved the consent agenda at the very beginning, right? Yeah.
You did.
So we don't even need to, okay. Then we will withdraw
I
that.
withdraw my motion.
And I will correct. Oh. Okay. Then on to closing items, upcoming meetings. The February 13th, 2023 Committee of the Whole and February 27th, 2023, the board meeting. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I so motion to adjourn.
Ms. Watley moves. Is there a second? Okay, thank you.